Hello, everybody, and welcome to No New Leaders. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Nichols. Glad that you're with us. Today, we're going to be having a really interesting conversation about what it takes to actually build something, what it takes to actually sustain something. And I'm really grateful to have my co-host with me, and that is Mr. Mazi Mutafa. Of course, he is the executive director of Words, Beats, and Life. Even though he has a grainy camera, from some old, Apple IIe that he has, we're glad to have him with us today. So, Mazi, can you explain a little further what we're talking about today?
Jay, before we jump into this topic, I've been having conversations with. I'm fortunate in my world of work, just like you, to engage with younger people, younger adults in both of our cases. And this week, I got kind of blindsided. I was talking to some young people about happiness and their own level of happiness, and I had no idea how unhappy they were until I asked the question. And so I was talking to somebody in my office, and they were like, "Yo, it's just miserable." And I was like, "What makes it miserable?" And they were like, "Oh, it's global warming, it's police shootings, it's shooter drill, it's all these things that we see on the news, like being internalized, this idea like of being a person that never knew a world other than this, because this has been happening, these things have been happening or being talked about for so long." But that led me to go into a classroom where I was teaching a set of young people that are ages 19 to 25. To do a poll test to find out how people rated their own happiness. And so I asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, don't be asking me no questions, and 10 being exuberant, how would they rate their own level of happiness? And I was blindsided because about 85% of them rated, on a scale of 1 to 10, rated their happiness a 3 or a 4. And I didn't leave enough time to get into it. I just wanted to know, not in that moment how happy they were, but just in general. And I was kind of surprised. And so I wanted to start off today by asking you about your own level of happiness, Dr. Nichols, just because usually we start this show off, I bring you on, it's like, ain't nothing going on but the writ. So I wonder how you would rate your own level of happiness. Because what I found is people our age have been rating themselves, at least in my own circle, have been rating themselves an 8 or a 9, 7.5 at the lowest. And so I wonder if part of this is generational, if part of this is informational, if part of this is just we went through those tougher times. But on a scale of 1 to 10, Jay, how are you rating your own personal level of happiness, and why?
I think I'd go with 7 or 8 because, I have a wonderful family. I have great friends. I have a home. I have not just a house, but an actual home, and that's a great thing. I have great kids. I'm relatively healthy. The only thing I think keeps me maybe from a 10 is that there are certain things in my career that I aspire to reach that that I've run into some roadblocks. But honestly, that's what makes it kind of fun. So I'm not even sure that maybe my number should be higher, because anybody who's successful will tell you that the most fun part is reaching that level of success. So there have been things, maybe career wise, that I would like to reach and haven't, and there have been some things that have changed in my career and how my career is understood. But other than that, like, I'm happy. I can't see any reason to not be happy. I mean, the world has never been perfect. There's always been destruction and violence and things like that. And, but right now my life is good.
I'm curious, would you have said that? Would that have been your same response? Because I remember during COVID and a major part of your career moving online, would your answer have still been a 9 back during COVID, or was that kind of uncertainty of the moment? Did that bring you down, or were you still at the same level? And I'm asking mostly because the young people I'm engaging with are people who were graduating from high school during COVID. So they missed out on things like prom. They missed out on being like a senior and like being an upperclassman in the school, in the physical space. And so these are the young people that kind of missed out on some of the things that were critical to our own development as just young adults. So I wonder, was your rating during COVID the same?
For me, probably. I mean, I think I was much less satisfied with my day job, which is teaching. I don't like teaching online. It's not something that I was trained to do. It's not something that I enjoy. So from that perspective, I think it might drop a small notch. But again, I was able to steer clear of COVID. I'm kind of a homebody anyway, and I got to see movies that I didn't have to go to the movie theater. I got them for free. There were a lot of good things about COVID, that era, not about COVID itself. I got to work on a lot of my personal projects that I would not have had time to do. I don't have time to put the same energy into. So I think it might drop a tad, but not much. I think I was happy during COVID.
Well, with that being said, I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about the process of building a vision, because this was literally the activity I did with those students. And one of the things that I think is instrumental in building a vision is that you create something that is bigger than you and is bigger than the people that you're working with. And I say that because the people that you're working with can change, but if the vision is big enough, it'll attract other people to get involved and engaged. I also know the challenges of building a vision, especially if you're not seeing the results you want. Like, we've been doing this show now for a few months, and I don't really know that either of us are super happy with the viewership. It's really just an opportunity for me to talk to one of my best friends about what he thinks about stuff in public. And for me, that makes it worth it. It makes it worth it to learn more about how you see things, how we see things similarly or differently. But I think in terms of the process of building a vision, I wonder, you've been a part of multiple initiatives and projects, some of which you've started, some of which you've joined, excluding WBL. Maybe can you talk a little bit about your own experience joining somebody else's vision or trying to recruit people for your own, and what were some of the challenges in that effort, and then maybe some of the rewards?
I think joining someone else's vision has a reward because you don't always have to find the direction. It can be on someone else's, it's someone else to find the actual vision, which is a lot of times the difficult part. You're just kind of plugged in to do hopefully what you do best and what you can bring to the table. There's a lot of advantages to that, when you don't have to be, the buck doesn't stop with you. It's when, you can kind of plug and play. It's like if you're working for a corporation and what you do is marketing, they're not asking you to, do anything other than marketing. And that can be, that can be good. But at the same time, I think it's more rewarding when you start something, when it's your idea, your vision, and you have to find all the pieces that are to plug in and to make it work. There's something really, really satisfying about that. Watching your vision flourish, going through that process. So I think there are good things about both. The bad thing, again,
But
when it's
Jay,
not your vision, is a lot of times you want to come back and be like, hey, this isn't going to work, or this isn't the way we should do it. But someone else is like, this is my vision, and they kind of hoard, the vision. and are not willing to expand it to other people. And that can be frustrating.
Stop doing the bad impersonation of my voice. I'm asking for real things, though. I'm asking actual experiences, not the abstract theory, actual experiences you've had being a part of joining somebody else's vision or trying to build a team around your own. So like name the things. You can use first names or last names, however you want to go. But like the real, like what it's really like to be a part of building something versus from the leadership or from the support role.
Well, I can talk recently. I would go from the media perspective, kind of joining in with other networks and other podcasts, and it's kind of their vision and trying to build that, with them, but kind of playing your role. Even though the podcasts and things that I've been a part of, they always took what I had to say into account and gave me a voice in every decision that was made. There were other things that I thought would have made things a little more successful, and it just it didn't work out. Then of course when I've had opportunities where I've built things. I have a podcast called The Working Class Elites right now. It's a political podcast. And that's a lot of fun. It's very rewarding. There's obviously not a lot of money in it, or none at this point, other than spending money. But at the same time, it's cool to be able to do things the way I want to do them. It's difficult though, because I've got to book the guests. You know what I mean? I've got to come up with the topics of conversation. And as you competed on one of my game show, and I thought that was a great idea and a great thing to do. But it's difficult to do it on your own. So there's pluses and minuses. Those are some examples.
Yeah, I mean, so I had the students do an activity where they needed to tell a visual story, and I broke them up. They're not journalists. They're all participating in a kind of leadership development program, specifically in a theater space. And I gave them the task of breaking up into people who were familiar with the neighborhood we were in and people who weren't, so that there could be different levels of knowledge in the group. And then I gave them a fixed amount of time, which was 30 minutes, to go out in a neighborhood and take 5 pictures to tell a story that would compel someone to come to this neighborhood. And I didn't say who the audience was. That was for them to decide. I didn't say whether they were tourists or people who were in the city, et cetera. And so this was an opportunity for them to go out and see how they functioned as a group and what kind of leadership they would thrive under. And so one of the things I asked was, was there a defined leader in each of your groups? And there were 5 groups. Maybe 2 of them had defined leadership. The rest of them had a shared leadership model. And the kind of places that they went and the photos they got and the way that they operated varied. And so I did that in part because I think part of what you're describing is kind of variations of hierarchical leadership, where there's a person who's in charge, whose vision it is, and that person is also responsible. What I really appreciated about all of them is that they had equal responsibility, that all of them had a phone to be able to participate because they all had the same tools, the same time, different degrees of knowledge about the neighborhood, but they had people who were with them that were experts. And the team I was most impressed with was the one that only went to one location and decided to take 5 photos there, because their audience was the business community. They went to the convention center to go and take photos there because they'd had their own particular experiences being there for events, but they knew that venue had lots of different audiences. And so their approach to telling a visual story was about a singular place versus the other 4 groups all went all over the neighborhood and got different businesses, different landmarks. But all of those people, the other 4 their audiences were all tourists. None of them thought about how to bring people from throughout the city to participate in the convention center. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't give them a goal other than to spend 30 minutes getting 5 pictures, working together to be able to tell a visual story. Those were the 4 tasks. And how they did it varied from each group. And I think that that's really important when we're talking about particularly working with younger generations around ideas of leadership, that they are totally over the idea of hierarchical leadership. They are totally over individual responsibility in some ways. They do want individual praise, but this idea that they are solely responsible for things is not as common as I think it might have been for folks like us, in terms of the ways in which we approach leadership and responsibility. And I think on some levels that provides an opportunity to create a different kind of, of visioning activity for how to engage with young adults who are moving into organizations and organizing in a way that is different, that actually provides an opportunity to remix or to remake or to at least rethink how it is we approach leadership and accountability when it comes to advancing a vision. I have always said that the one of our responsibilities as people is to find people we agree enough with to be able to work together on the things we agree about. You don't have to agree with them about everything. You also don't have to only work with that group of people. But when you find people who you agree enough with, work with those people. And in establishing a vision, the vision has got to be bigger than the people at the table for at least one reason. Everybody at the table will eventually leave. Everyone. The problems might not get fixed, or you could have tremendous success. Everyone's gonna leave, either because they move on to do other work. God forbid they pass away. Any number of things. Everyone's gonna leave. So when you're building, you got to be thinking about, if none of us wanted to do this anymore, are there other people that would want to do this? And if there aren't, how do you build a vision that is actually compelling to more than just the people that started? Words Beats in Life is now a 21-year-old organization. It has four co-founders. All three, except for me, left after the first year. Why? Because three of them were in college when we started it. I had graduated, and they decided they wanted to do other things. They didn't want to work in a nonprofit. They just wanted to help build it. And at that point, I had the opportunity to be like, well, do I want to continue to do this work on my own? Is the vision big enough that more people would be attracted to be a part of it? And one of the things I was really fortunate, there were more people that came while those founders were still there. So as people cycled out, new people cycled in. As people cycled out, new people cycled in. And that's been the case for 21 years. And I think that's not because like I'm some great charismatic leader, or even because, as Jason said, it's like my vision and I got to hold it. But it's really that I've tried to build something that is beyond my individual abilities to operate, to grow, to maintain. And I think that's critical. That is critical when thinking about developing a vision for a company, for a business. I have so many friends who, so that's where it's being. So that's one example. Another good example would be Decipher, which is a hip hop radio show that I'm the co-founder of at WPFW. And that was started by, I want to say, 10 to 15 people who wanted to bring hip hop to a jazz and justice station. And all 15 of those people were very different from each other. So what we agreed to do was basically break up into tribes, and each of us would kind of run a single night of operation. That worked for a really long time, until people started to leave, and then people who were part of different tribes decided to go, and they wanted to create a new tribe, which has been in place for the last 15 years. It's a really different model where each person, like Jason said, does their part. And then as they continue to do their part and new opportunities present themselves, people can shift. You're not stuck with a specific group. But while you're with that group, everyone is doing what Jason described, like booking talent, selecting music, participating in marketing, on some levels in a way that's equal, or that speaks specifically to your talents or skill sets. I think that each of those models require an idea that is big enough that there's more than just the people who started that want to do it. I think that's critical. It's a critical factor in building a vision, that it can't be so small nobody else wants to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It certainly has to be a big vision, something that people are going to want to, like you said, cycle in and cycle out, and that they're going to want to build it. And other people are going to admire it and want to add their new blocks to it. So I 100% agree that when you think small, number one, your vision doesn't last. You know what I mean? If I think if you can see the end goal, and it's just something where you can just stand on top of a mountain, then your vision isn't big enough. I know with Words Beats in Life, you're always trying to take Words Beats in Life to the next level and to a new level, and there's always something else. I can recall in the early days of Words Beats in Life where it was like, we want to get to a $500,000 a year nonprofit status. That was the goal, and then you got there, and then it was like, all right, well, maybe we can get to 700,000. Got there, then maybe get to 1 million. Got there, But there's always a next step. There's always, we can hire more people. We can do more events. And one of the things that I've admired about the organization, having seen it from its founding, is the fact that the people involved are always trying to find new creative ways to do things. It's not just, okay, we do a b-boy jam, or okay, we do this. Okay, this is what we do. It's always, how else? What is a new way through hip hop that we can serve the community? And this is, this podcast is just another, way where we've kind of expanded, or the organization, I should say, has expanded in order to find new ways to reach people and to serve the community. So I think you definitely have to have a broad vision. Your vision always has to be growing, and you have to be willing to adjust with it depending on the circumstances. And that's what's going to lead to more success.
So even though you're agreeing with me, I think I'm going to push back just a little bit, because I had a conversation maybe 2 months ago with a friend who decided to sunset the organization that she and her brother co-founded, and she said she sunsetted it because it had actually achieved its mission. So that they had a vision to accomplish a particular thing. They accomplished that thing, and they were like, "We out." And now we're moved on to doing other things. Because I think that one of the things I also appreciate about some founders is that they don't plan to stay forever. They really do try to build a thing that someone else can inherit, and they move on. I could think there's an organization here in Washington, D.C. called Fair Chance. I met the founder of the organization. She transitioned out of the organization in like year number 5, became the board chairperson, and then transitioned out of that 3 years later. So she gave 8 years of her life to it, but she didn't feel the need to be the person that was leading it the entire time. I myself am not that selfless of a founder. Like, the things that I want to do at the founding of Words Beats, like, many of those things have been accomplished. But like you said, one of the beauties of building an organization that really is alive and not just dedicated to a few specific projects or tasks, or even a single neighborhood, is that there are always more people who you're able to serve, more people in need of the thing that you do, who, if they knew you existed, would actually take advantage of it if they could. And I think that it's important to recognize that every vision doesn't have to be a forever vision, just like every vision doesn't need to be a short-term vision. But being clear about how you're going to get people involved and invested, I think, is one of the second most important thing after you develop an idea, is to figure out who else is excited about this. Is there a community of people? Are there folks studying who want to do a job like this? Because I think that a lot of people, when they start, let's talk about, for-profit businesses. I got multiple friends who started candy stores or bars or restaurants. And when they started them, I never asked them, but I always thought, like, do you really want to spend the next 15 years or 20 years of your life doing this? Because that's my standard, like, trying to build something that is literally your business. And a lot of those businesses failed after 5 years. And not because the people weren't good leaders or because, they had bad ideas. I think in part because a lot of times people bit off more than they could chew, especially in terms of commercial real estate. Like, sometimes you have this grand vision for all the ways you're going to decorate this space, and don't really think about the fact that most of the most successful restaurants in your community are small. They're little mom and pop shops that maybe seat 15 to 20 people, but they're thriving in terms of profit, in terms of staffing, in terms of regular cash flow. That sometimes the vision itself can destroy the project because it is too big, too early. So thinking about the steps, the process for growing. I've, you know, I don't pretend like I have really very many years. I just have my own history. Worst Beats in Life almost closed three times in 21 years. And each of the times was for the same reason, which was that I was chasing a bigger dream than our budget said we could afford. And so I had more people or more supplies or more programming than our budget said we could afford. But I knew that if we made those investments, the end result, the impact we wanted could actually be achieved. It feels like now, after 2 decades, we're finally entering a new phase where the work we're doing is right sized to our budget. The team that we have is right sized to our efforts. Um, but it took me 20 years to get here. 3 near-death experiences of the organization. Um, and I learned from each of those things. Like, I'm sitting in our office right now. I remember right before COVID when there was nobody who worked here other than our contracted teachers. Today, we have 75 people that work here. The biggest team we've ever had, multiple publications. But part of that was about shifting the priorities of how we would spend money and how we would approach employing people. You got to be open. So one of the other things I think is critical to a vision is not just that it's big enough, but that you have the right people at the table to be able to help you realize it. I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Macau, about a publication that you and he worked on, and he was like, "Yeah, it's been 2 years since I did that writing." And I was like, "That's cool, but it's a 5-year-old idea. I just didn't have the money or the people to be able to execute on it until 2 years ago." And so recognizing great ideas don't run out of time. They wait to find the resources and build the team around those great ideas so they can actually be realized to the degree that you want them to. And I think that's part of having vision, is not just what's the big, hairy, audacious goal we're working towards, or even what's the next project, but really, what does it take to do this? How can I get the people I need to do it? And how can I get the money that it's going to take? Because a lot of times people with great ideas skip that last step, which is the money. That they just got a great idea and good people. And it's like, well, let's just do it, even though we can't afford it. And it's like, that's a great way to burn bridges. It's a great way to burn people out. Because unfortunately, we do live in a capitalist society where every great person still has bills that they need to pay when they get home. And your ability to make any difference in their ability to pay that makes a difference. I'm going to mute myself because there's a car alarm in the background. But what do you think about that, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, there was there was a lot you said there, and there were a lot of things that I agreed with. Um, I definitely think that, well, my perspective, and something that I don't think you will agree with, is that you talked about people sunsetting their organizations or saying that they achieved their mission. Um, I think that's different than somebody who transitions out and lets someone else take over the mission. I think those are two different things. I think the person who says they achieved their mission, to me, it seems like they're thinking small. Um, that's from a nonprofit perspective. At least, I'm not a nonprofit manager, so I don't understand the world the way you do. But if you've already achieved the mission, then it seems like you had a pretty narrow mission. That's different to me than saying, I'm going to grow this mission, and then I'm going to let someone else take over it, and then I'm going to pursue a new challenge. I think that's fine. There are people out there who start businesses, grow businesses, and then they sell the business. The other thing is, when you were talking about the restaurants and candy stores and things like that, number one, those are notoriously difficult businesses to run. Restaurants fail all the time. You have to really, really have a good hook in order, and a great location in order to make a restaurant work. And the profit margin for restaurants and any kind of food related business can be small. So it's difficult. It's a difficult job and a difficult business. Some people are able to get in and be very successful, and other people, it's a difficult, it can be a difficult journey. Um, but if you're really devoted to it, the other thing is if something fails, um, you should take your lessons, learn from them, and rebuild and try again. Maybe not the same. Take what you've learned and fix it so that you can do it. With the lessons that you've learned, so that you can do it correctly. And I think that's something that a lot of us have. We have to have that ability to take a loss or get knocked down, but then get back up and fight again. And I think there are some people, when they see a failure or they get close to, like you said, words beats in life, almost, died 3 times. There are a lot of people who would have come close to death and would have been like, all right, yeah, it's not working. And they would have given up. They'd have been like, yeah, we had a good run. We had 8 years. We had, we had 15 years. But there, others like yourself who get knocked down or get battered really badly, but are like, all right, I've learned this time. And now, after 3 knockdowns, usually 3 knockdowns in boxing, that means you're knocked out, but it's a wrap. But sometimes there's, one of the great fights of all time. Mazi knows that I'm a boxing fan. One of the great fights of all time was not Julio Cesar Chavez, Juan Manuel Marquez versus Manny Pacquiao. And Manny Pacquiao came in and knocked Juan Manuel Marquez down 3 times in the first round. And the ref didn't stop it, and there was no 3 knockdown rule for this fight. And people always say, well, ref, why didn't you stop it? And he was like, I looked at Marquez's face, and he just looked like he was begging me for another shot. Like he knew what he needed to do to get it right. And so I let the fight go on. And if you know that fight, the rest of the fight was a classic. And many people, though, because of those 3 knockdowns, many people gave it to, the fight ended up going to Manny Pacquiao. But many people think Juan Manuel Marquez won that fight because he came back and fought incredibly hard the rest of the way and outboxed Manny Pacquiao. So my point is, you can get knocked down several times, but if you have a strong, broad vision and you are really willing to work toward it, and you think you're the person to get that organization to the next level, you can get knocked down, but you adjust and then you come back and you fight again, and you can actually grow your organization to where you're in a much better place.
Well, Jay, we're gonna have a once in a series admission, which is I don't disagree with you. When the person told me they sunset their organization, I was kind of like, really? But I do think the truth is that sometimes people actually got to decide what's more valuable, their own life and well-being or the work that they're doing. Like that might have been work that was literally so exhausting that rather than continue to do the work, it made more sense to move on and say that other people could do that work. At the same time, I do think that if you think about it, like both of us graduated from the University of Maryland, and one of the beauties of student leadership on a college campus is usually you get 1 year to be able to do the thing you want to do. And I think there's tremendous value in that because it gives you a deadline. You got till this period of time to do all this stuff you want to do. The challenge is that's not really how leadership works in the rest of the world. Like usually you don't do a thing for a year and then walk away, whether that's a job or an internship or a business. It usually takes several years. And the things you can accomplish in 1 year are a shadow of what you could accomplish after 5 years. And so I think that this is one of the things about vision, like all those student groups on every campus in the United States of America and abroad were created by people who had a broad vision for an idea that would be useful to student populations for years and decades to come. I think that same idea applies to building a business or creating a nonprofit, that you need to be thinking, I get hit by a bus tomorrow, or die in a fiery car crash on the way home today. Have I built something that someone else could continue and would want to continue? Not necessarily in the same way that I did, but period. Because Jay, you know this, and I probably said this in a past episode. I'm not even going to lie to you. It wasn't until like year 19 or 20 where I was committed to the idea that Words Beats in Life should outlive me. I was quite content with the idea of saying our legacy is the people that worked here, the people that served here in terms of board members, and the young people whose lives were impacted by it. That's the legacy that I'm most concerned about, because that's the only thing I can control. After me, there could be somebody who gets hired, who comes in and steals all the money and gets it closed down anyway. So I can't personally be emotionally invested in a future for this business, but I can be thinking about how to build something that allows for the organization to cultivate people over time who can step into leadership. It doesn't have to be a stranger. It could be someone who loves Words Beats Life even more than me, because it actually impacted their life as a young person. It actually impacted their neighborhood because they live there. It actually impacted the way they think about service or hip hop. So like COVID made me sit down and think like, why am I being so selfish about the idea of trying to build something that could outlive me, that could be of value beyond my own life, my own ideas, and my own contribution? Why am I being so selfish? And the answer, the real for real answer, was fear. Was fear of what it would be without me that would be so different. Because I'll be honest, a lot of times, even though we build collective visions and we share power and authority, there's a lot of impulses among people who are on my team that I feel like run counter to the work we're trying to do. Like asking questions like, where's the diversity in our panels, in the people that we publish, in the young people that we serve, in the communities we do outreach to? A lot of times I'm that person in the conversation asking that question. And I don't think that should be the case. Where are the women? Where are the LGBTQ plus people? Where are the people doing innovative work in technology who go beyond the scope of what it is that we do? Where are those people in our conversations? A lot of times is a question I'm asking. And I feel like after 2 decades of asking these questions, they should be things that occur to more people. But part of the problem is with that constant coming and going and churning of people is that the way that I built it for 19 years didn't require the organization to really have that as a part of its culture. It was about having that be a part of the experience of the people that were here, that they would carry on to the work that they would do someplace else. Now, asking these critical questions is central to all discussions, because I think that it's not just about what WBL will be in the future and who it will serve in the future, but who it could be serving right now, who should be at the table right now, who should be making decisions about the work that's happening for a while, for the organization. RBI wanted to chime in, said he been in the studio, but I'm just catching the stream. Salute. RBI is one of those day ones who's been here since literally Words Beats in Life was a conference at the Namburu Cultural Center at the Black Student Union. He's chiming in there. He doesn't want to ever be a guest. He always wants to chime in during the show. He said, I say the scope is maintaining open arms for conversation. I would agree. And actually, I didn't say I'm the only person. I said I'm one of the only people in those conversations. RBI is another, because more so than anybody else at the table, he is a part of multiple communities. Anytime someone likes to tell me they're going to ask RBI to do something, my response is always, he's part of 17 other things, right? He's not just here at Words Beats in Life. So if he's going to get involved, understand it's going to be on a very long list of things to do. But I think that's important to recognize the people on your team, what it is they bring, and how it is they can continue to help expand and add depth to the vision.
So first of all, shout out and salute to my brother RBI. One of the things that I think, is an easy way around what you're saying. And I do a lot of interviews on the news, and they ask me about this within the Democratic Party, and you could talk about it with Republicans. Is people are like the Democratic Party, and actually for both parties, that there are people in Congress who are too old, that they shouldn't serve anymore. There are all these polls that say that Joe Biden shouldn't run for office again, which I think is ridiculous. But we don't need to talk about that.
We should.
But I think what everyone is alluding to is that you've got to groom a successor. I've even heard like Dana White, where he's such a big part of the UFC brand that some people have said, because fighters come and go. The one thing that's been constant since the UFC kind of blew up has been Dana White. And so people are like, well, what's going to happen when Dana White goes? And Dana White is like, look, I have one guy that I've been grooming who, he's not in the, in the spotlight right now, but he's one guy that can do my job, do all aspects of my job. And when I'm ready to retire, that guy will come into the frame. Same thing, a lot of people pushed for new leadership instead of having Nancy Pelosi in being the Speaker of the House, or, I guess now she'd be minority leader. A lot of people in the Democratic Party were like, we need new leadership. And I think towards the end, when people started pushing her in that direction, she started to groom Hakeem Jeffries to be her successor as the leader, the party leader. So I think, you've got to groom somebody. This is why I think Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris, who's in her 50s. Now, whether she's the person to take on the mantle, that I guess it depends on who you ask. But the point is, you've got to have people that you're grooming, in order to take on leadership roles. And if you want your organization to last, if you want your restaurant to last, or you want whatever business that you're in to continue, and that legacy to continue beyond, your lifetime, that person needs to be, towards the end, needs to be in the trenches with you the entire time so that they are ready. This is even, people have said it, this is why a lot of like dictators, like it never lasts beyond their lifetime, because they don't groom successors really well. And, their children usually are spoiled and don't understand leadership. And they're, like I said, they're not in the trenches. And that's why those kinds of setups fail, besides the desire for democracy. So I think it's important, if you're a person in leadership, and particularly when you feel like, you can see the end of your career coming, or you're going to move out, I bet you that person that you were talking about who stayed in the organization for 5 years, she probably towards, a certain point was like, this person could probably take my job. And I've heard you say that about a few people in WBL. This person could potentially do my job. So that person saw that, they moved on to board chair. They saw a person who could run the board, then they moved out of the organization. And I think that's the way, you avoid having, leaving an organization and then it falling apart.
So I'm glad you said that, so I could totally disagree with you. Not totally, but I think you're right. I think you're right in terms of that being a strategy. I don't think it's the strategy. I have seen examples that I probably would lean more to fail, where I can think of an organization at its 20th year, the founder decided he was too old to run a youth organization and wanted to hire someone else, and the person he hired was a terrible fit. They were from outside the organization and literally took their budget from, I want to say something like $15 million, $10 to $15 million down to like 3 in 2 years, because that person offended so many funders, chased off so many staff that they were a terrible fit. And now the third executive director of that organization is in place, and she's amazing. She's rebuilding it in a way that's different, but still true to the mission of the organization. She was a young person that came through the organization, so she has a deep love for it because of the way that it impacted her life. But she wasn't groomed for it. She was out in the world doing her own thing, learning whatever skills that she would need in order to be an executive director. And so that's the only piece. That's the only piece I disagree with you about. I don't necessarily think that the only way, and you didn't say it was the only way, so you don't have to correct me, but I don't even necessarily think it's the best way to say that the people who should assume leadership should come from within the organization. I do think it's important to have opportunities for promotion within an organization so that people don't just leave because there's a ceiling. But I do think there's real value in bringing in new energy. That often happens on board of directors. That often happens through interns. That often happens through residencies. There's lots of different ways to bring in more voices, more ideas to keep an organization fresh. And so the only piece I'm disagreeing with is about the idea of I should be working right now to groom somebody to take my place. And it's like, no. And I know that you didn't say me, but you gave the example. So I'm just pushing back on saying I'm not Dana White. But I think that it's not because there's no value in what it is you're saying. It's just I would almost prefer for a student who came through this program, went to college, ideally went to college, did some work in the world, built a portfolio, and then because of a deep and abiding love for the impact that the organization had on their life, comes back to say, I want to lead it. I want to be the person to take it over. Because I really do think there's value, of course, in staying in a single place and working your way up the ranks, but also in saying there's value in going out into the world, building a whole different set of relationships and networks so that when you come back to add to the vision, it's not just regurgitating the existing vision, but saying, like I was in Uganda recently and I was talking to some folks from Toronto and they were like, so what are you doing in cyberspace? I said, you mean beyond our website? Nothing. Because they were like, oh, but you know, the metaverse and crypto and I was like, that's for you, bro. You're a different generation. We're not going to do that. Not because it's not valuable, and not because we'll never do it, but because I'd rather bring you in as an expert to present than to have us just start to move in a direction that isn't really core to our mission and our work. Doesn't mean we can't engage in the conversation. Doesn't mean we can't engage with the people. It just means that that isn't necessarily going to become integral to our work in the way that it is to yours. But it might under new leadership. It might under board direction. It might under, my goal is to hire a deputy. It might under the more people that come into the space and whose ideas are not only allowed, listened to, affirmed, but also resourced, given budget, the more you can do and the more impact people are able to have. And I think that that's really important. Again, like the thing that I learned, the most important lesson I learned in 21 years is that to hire a person or to bring someone onto a team who's inspired by a vision, the very worst thing you can do is bring them on with no resources, human or material. Because I did that. That was actually the first time WBL almost closed, when there were 7 people who worked here full time and they were all called a director and none of them had any staff. Who you directed? Director? Yourself? That was my fault, not theirs, because I thought that the title mattered. And I also thought that because they were all super competent, they could do the work. And they could. They could also get burned out because they were doing all of the work.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there is something to be said for new energy. Absolutely. I think this is why, again, as a director or an owner or whatever it is, that you are sensible about hiring. But there are certain, I think, blocks of stability that you can mentor someone. I think that person probably brought someone in at the end and was like, oh, when you talked about the person who had the $15 million organization, they brought someone in at the very end thinking, oh, this person's young, they've got some cool experience, or they're charismatic or whatever. They haven't grown with the organization. Not saying that that necessarily needs to be the case, but because they didn't maybe get those building blocks of stability, brought, handed down, and they weren't a part of the organization for long enough, what happens is that they go in, they offend funders, they don't know the ropes the way they should have, and then they had to get bounced out of there, and luckily someone was able to rebound. But I think
Can I give you one more fact, because I forgot to say this?
Sure.
That they tried to hire people from within the organization, and none of them felt that they could meet the standard that the founder had established. So nobody wanted to apply, so they had to go outside. Just another factoid.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I think the new person coming in that case failed seriously because they didn't lean on some of the people who were there before. I do think new people coming in with new energy and thinking of new ways to expand is a good thing. And a new person who says, I'm going to take and WBL into the metaverse, that might be interesting. Crypto is a bad idea. Crypto's always been a bad idea, but don't let me go on that tangent either. But yeah, so I definitely think people who are willing to take risks, willing to think, in different ways. I think about Warren Buffett. One of the things that he says, in terms of investment for Berkshire Hathaway is he's like, I won't invest in anything I don't understand, which I think is a really smart way of investing. He's like, I do not invest in anything I don't understand. But he does always tell this story of having a meeting with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates trying to explain Microsoft to him. And he was like, I don't get it, so I'm not going to invest. And he's like, I missed out. This was like the early days of Microsoft. And he's like, I missed out because I didn't have someone probably a little younger, someone around there, maybe on the side of me. He doesn't say this, but I'm just thinking about it. Who maybe was like, this makes sense because of this. And maybe I should, who could maybe break it down into plain language that, Bill Gates couldn't do, and convince him that this was a good investment for Berkshire Hathaway. But instead, it's good that he trusts his own instincts, but maybe, you need someone, you need to bring in new energy and people who have expanded thinking and people who have their ear to the streets in a way that maybe you haven't. I think that can be good for leadership.
I totally agree. And I think that to your point, speaking to the topic of establishing a vision, this got to be broad enough that other people get excited about it, but clear enough that other people understand it. This idea of being able, I still have this problem to some degree when people say, well, what does words be to life? I can say the mission and I can say what the priorities are, but it's so much more than that. And I see how frustrating it is for a person who really wants a simple answer when you're trying to build a complex business. When you recognize that the things that you want to dismantle are not. So like, as an example, right? If we want to, if what we really exist to do is to end poverty, there's so many contributing factors to poverty. If what we want to do is have an impact on self-esteem, there's so many contributing factors to self-esteem. And so, like, for me, when I see organizations whose mission is super simple and super clear, and so is their program, it's like very surface level in terms of the way in which they're engaging with participants or a community. I always just feel like this is helpful, but not a solution. It's helpful, but not a solution. And I personally feel like, dedicating 2 decades of my life and what I think will be the rest of my working life to something, it can't just be helpful. It has to be working towards a set of solutions. Solutions in an individual school, in an individual classroom, in a particular set of neighborhoods, Like, it's got to be transformational in a way that is undeniable by everyone who can look at it critically. There's some young people who've come through our program, and some teachers and some board members. I can point to them as examples of people that benefited from, added value to, and have taken what they've learned someplace else to make other things better. Do you know what I'm saying? I was literally watching the NAAC, the Image Awards the other day, and saw an alumni of our program in a commercial being featured as a creative that's working with a major corporation on a project. I can point, not to a ton, but I can point to young people who've been personally deeply impacted by the work we do. And I feel like my real goal is to see more young people and adults, working artists and would-be artists, arts educators, and entrepreneurs impacted by our mission and our programming in a way that is discernible to anyone who's actually paying attention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a worthwhile goal. Certainly, if you can impact people in measurable ways, and you can see the change, of course, that's the way to do it. I think when you've got a broad issue to tackle, like for a broad, large community, like we want to end homelessness in DC. That's going to be really difficult to do. You know what I mean? Like, number one, there's a structure in place that continually makes people homeless. So, you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to deal with evictions. You're going to have to deal with, there's so many different facets to that are going to be really, really difficult in order to end. You could probably end houselessness, perhaps. Homelessness is going to be really hard to do. Or I want to end poverty, for the state of Maryland. That's going to be really, really difficult to do. We live in a capitalist society. Capitalism, one could argue, requires a certain level of poverty, relative poverty. So, but can I get this classroom reading at grade level, or better yet, can I get this classroom to improve their reading over this year? That's a reachable goal. You know what I mean? Like, you can actually do that. You can take 25 or 30 kids and get them to a higher grade level reading than they start out at. Those are goals that are reachable, they're attainable. And if you do that, if you have a bunch of attainable goals, then you start to see major change start to happen.
No doubt. Jay, I want to thank you for making time for this show. Per usual, you are my most consistent co-host. I love you, brother, and I appreciate your insights, especially when I disagree with them, because they're still brilliant, even if I don't agree with them.
Yes, sir. Oh, I want to say happy birthday to my wife. Today is her big 4-0, but luckily she still looks 25. So I'm going to go out and have fun with her. Thank y'all for watching. Thanks for watching No New Leaders.
No doubt. With that said, if you got time this week and you're in Washington, D.C., feel free to tune in to WPFW 89.3 FM, where I'll be co-hosting with Patrick Washington, our weekly talk show called Something to Say. This week's guests are going to be Tim from Tech Turnip, who actually appeared here previously on No New Leaders, and Substantial from Substantial Art and Music. Each of them are going to be coming on to talk about literacy, business literacy and tech literacy. With that said, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate RBI for tuning in, along with the other folks that joined us. Shout out to my good family at the WBL Academy. If you have a young person in your life that's still looking for a community to join to develop their artistic skills, check out this commercial.
Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy, And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, emceeing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.